She had never expected a simple hallway conversation to feel like a secret unfolding. The fluorescent lights hummed above, yet she barely noticed them. All she could hear was the quiet, deliberate cadence of her mentor's voice as he corrected a minor mistake in her report. Marianne had always admired Mr. Ellison from a distance, respected his calm authority and sharp insight. But tonight, the ordinary had turned into something unusually personal. Marianne tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, pretending to focus on the spreadsheet in front of her. The office was nearly empty at this late hour, save for the soft hum of computers left on standby. Mr. Ellison leaned against the edge of her desk, a stack of documents in hand, and spoke as if sharing a secret meant only for her. There was a gentleness in his tone, the kind reserved for someone truly interested in learning, not merely completing a task. "I noticed a small discrepancy in the third quarter numbers," he said, tapping a finger lightly against the page. "It's subtle, but your attention to detail here can make a real difference." Marianne nodded, but her mind wandered. It wasn't the critique itself that held her attention, it was the way he said it. Careful, patient, and unexpectedly kind. She felt an unusual warmth creep up her neck, a softness that made her stomach tighten. Why did a professional comment feel so personal? "I'll correct it immediately," she murmured, her voice quieter than usual. She met his eyes, and for a moment, the air seemed to thrum with unspoken acknowledgement. Marianne had worked under Mr. Ellison for over a year, yet tonight felt different. "Take your time, Marianne," he said, his voice steady but carrying an oddly comforting weight. "I trust you'll catch everything." She exhaled, surprised at how relieved she felt. There was something about his presence, an aura of quiet confidence, that made mistakes feel less threatening and effort feel recognized. It was a rare gift from someone who could have been cold and distant. And yet, he was neither. He was patient, encouraging, unexpectedly intimate in the most professional way. Marianne realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly, feeling the weight of hours pressing against her shoulders. The office clock ticked toward midnight. Outside, the city streets shimmered under lamplight, empty yet alive with distant sounds. There was a kind of hush in the world at this hour, a moment suspended between routine and revelation. "Do you usually stay this late?" Mr. Ellison asked, tilting his head slightly as he observed her. There was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity, a hint of concern. Marianne smiled faintly, a little embarrassed. "Sometimes. I like the quiet," she admitted. "It helps me focus." He nodded slowly, as if considering her answer more deeply than necessary. "I can understand that. There's a different clarity when the world is asleep, isn't there?" She hesitated. It was rare to hear such reflective thoughts from someone so often immersed in numbers and schedules. It felt almost like an invitation to speak, to share, to be seen beyond the professional. Marianne shifted slightly, sensing an unusual trust in the air between them. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket, pulling her attention away. She ignored it. This small exchange, the warmth in his voice, the attentive silence, felt like a secret she wasn't ready to share with anyone else. She glanced at him again, and something unspoken passed between them. Something that lingered in the air like the faint scent of paper and coffee. "You're doing well, Marianne. Don't underestimate your own precision," he added, his tone quiet but unwavering. "You have a sharp mind, and it shows." Marianne felt her cheeks warm. Words of encouragement were always appreciated, but tonight, they landed differently, almost like they had weight, like they belonged in a private corner of the world she hadn't expected to find. Her gaze flicked to the clock again. It was almost 1 a.m., and she realized she had stayed longer than she intended. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to move. There was something in this shared quiet, this unspoken acknowledgement, that made her feel seen. More than seen, perhaps understood. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at her lips. If this brief exchange was all that the night offered, it already felt monumental. She had not planned for this, an ordinary correction feeling charged with something unexpectedly personal, but somehow, it had happened anyway. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. The office felt heavier in its stillness now, almost holding its breath along with her. Marianne realized that leaving, stepping back into the empty streets, might feel different after tonight, like stepping from a quiet, shared secret into a world unaware of what had passed. Marianne hesitated in the elevator, watching the numbers descend in slow, deliberate steps. The hum of the machinery felt unusually loud tonight, as if echoing the strange energy left behind in the office. Her mind replayed the brief conversation with Mr. Ellison, the way his attention had lingered just a little longer than necessary. She tried to convince herself it was professional concern, nothing more. Yet her chest felt tight with the weight of unspoken connection. By the time she reached the lobby, the city was almost entirely asleep. Streetlights stretched long shadows across the pavement, and the occasional car passed with a soft, distant roar. She pulled her coat closer around her, feeling a chill that had little to do with the temperature. It was the after-effect of an encounter that had been so ordinary, yet somehow intimate. Marianne walked slowly, her steps measured. Her thoughts wandered to the documents he had reviewed, the way his hands had gestured while explaining minor corrections. It was a simple, professional interaction, but it had carried a warmth she hadn't expected. She wondered if he had noticed her noticing, if he had felt the same subtle shift in the air between them. Her phone buzzed again. A text from a friend, probably asking if she wanted to grab a coffee tomorrow. Marianne stared at the screen, fingers hovering. She realized she didn't want to answer yet. Her mind was still tangled in the quiet gravity of the night, in the soft, unexpected attentiveness that had brushed against her like a whisper. The walk home felt longer than usual. The city, usually comforting in its familiarity, now seemed slightly alien, reflective of the small, personal revelation she had experienced. Each step carried a memory of his words, of the careful, deliberate pauses, the patience in his eyes. How had such a brief exchange left her feeling so unsettled and, at the same time, quietly reassured? She paused outside the small park she passed on her route. The fountain had been turned off for the night, leaving only the faint scent of wet stone. She leaned against a railing, letting the night air fill her lungs. In the darkness, the world felt suspended. She could still feel him there, as if the office hadn't truly emptied, as if some part of that moment lingered in the space between memory and reality. Marianne sighed, feeling the edges of anxiety and wonder blur. She had spent months under Mr. Ellison's guidance, always admiring from a distance. But tonight, there had been something different, a recognition, perhaps, that they were both aware of more than just professional duties. She wasn't sure if it was mutual or entirely her own perception, but it had shifted something inside her. She thought about how she had been careful not to linger too obviously, not to make her attention apparent. And yet, in the quiet of the empty office, they had shared something. A mutual understanding, a brief crossing of lines that weren't boundaries, but rather subtle connections. Marianne found herself wondering what he had thought as he left her desk, documents in hand, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The street seemed emptier now, or perhaps it was just her perception. She walked past familiar cafes and closed shops, each one casting soft shadows across the pavement. The night carried its own voice, a whispered chorus that mirrored the unease and warmth inside her. Marianne's mind refused to quiet. Each thought returned to the same image, his attentive eyes, the quiet encouragement, the sense that she had been seen in a way that went beyond professional recognition. By the time she reached her apartment, her steps were almost hesitant. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, the silence wrapping around her like a soft blanket. She dropped her bag, letting the weight of the evening settle, yet the sensation of the brief exchange with Mr. Ellison refused to dissipate. It was stubborn, insistent, like an echo refusing to fade. Marianne poured herself a glass of water and moved toward the window. The city lights below twinkled like distant stars, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding in their midst. She rested her forehead against the cool glass, feeling the quiet intimacy of the night press gently against her chest. It had been a simple encounter, a short exchange over numbers and reports. And yet, it had left her feeling something she couldn't name, something personal, unexpected, and quietly profound. She knew she would think about it tomorrow, at work, and in every quiet moment after. There was no scandal here, no drama beyond the subtle heartbeat of human connection. Just a mentor, a mentee, and the delicate weight of unspoken recognition. It was enough to make the night feel alive, to leave her restless, and to make her question why small moments could feel so immense. Marianne finally settled onto the edge of her sofa, the glass of water trembling slightly in her hand. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that tonight had changed the way she would see her mentor, and perhaps even herself. A soft knock at the door startled her, quick and hesitant, as if it belonged to the night itself. Marianne froze, her hand stilling on the doorknob of her apartment. The knock came again, soft but deliberate, as if the person outside had been hesitant for a long time before finally acting. She glanced at the clock. It was past 1:30 a.m., and the city below was silent except for the occasional distant hum of a late taxi. Her mind raced, wondering who could possibly be calling at this hour. Cautiously, she approached the door and peered through the peephole. A familiar shadow shifted in the dim hallway. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Mr. Ellison. She blinked, certain she had imagined it. But there he was, standing calmly, coat draped over his arm, a look of mild concern on his face. "Marianne," he said softly when she opened the door, his voice carrying that same steady warmth that had unsettled and comforted her hours earlier. "I hope I'm not intruding. I realized I left something important in the office." Her hands tightened on the doorframe. She wanted to tell him it wasn't safe, it was late, that he should leave, but she found herself unable to form the words. She simply nodded, stepping aside to let him in. There was a quiet tension in the air, a fragile thread of intimacy that neither had intended, yet both seemed unwilling to break. He set his coat down on the small rack by the door and held out the folder he had mentioned. "I didn't want this to get lost in the shuffle," he said, his gaze flicking to her with the faintest shadow of something unspoken. Marianne took it, their fingers brushing lightly, and she felt the familiar stir of warmth, subtle and impossible to ignore. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure how to articulate the sudden surge of thoughts. She moved toward the living room, gesturing for him to sit. The apartment was small but tidy, filled with books and framed photographs that hinted at her quiet life. He settled on the sofa, careful and composed, yet there was a softness in his posture, an ease that seemed almost contradictory to his usual professional demeanor. For a moment, they both sat in silence. Marianne could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock, the hum of the city far below. She realized that silence no longer felt empty, it carried weight, a resonance from hours spent together in subtle, meaningful conversation. "I didn't expect to see you here," Marianne said finally, her voice gentle, cautious. "It's late." "I realize that," he replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "But I wanted to make sure this was secure. Important work should never get lost or overlooked." She nodded, her attention lingering on his face, the faint crease of concern in his brow. "I appreciate it," she said. There was something about his presence that made ordinary gratitude feel insufficient, like the words themselves couldn't fully carry the weight of acknowledgement she felt. The folder sat between them on the coffee table, but Marianne found herself barely noticing its contents. Her thoughts circled back to the earlier hours in the office, the quiet attentiveness in his tone, the subtle patience that had made her feel seen in ways few ever had. It was professional, yes, but something about the intimacy of shared focus lingered, delicate and electric, without ever crossing boundaries. He shifted slightly, as if sensing her inner turmoil. "I don't mean to impose," he said quietly. "I just thought it better to return this now rather than leave it unattended." "It's fine," Marianne reassured, though her heart pounded in her chest. She found herself strangely conscious of the proximity, the shared quiet, the subtle rhythm of two lives intersecting in this unplanned, fragile way. It was a strange feeling, both ordinary and remarkable, like discovering a hidden corner in a familiar place. The conversation turned to work again, light but purposeful. He explained minor details she had overlooked, gave advice on subtle improvements, and offered suggestions that were practical yet encouraging. Marianne listened, absorbed not only in the content but in the tone, the patient, kind cadence of his voice that seemed to settle every anxious corner inside her. Hours passed unnoticed. The night stretched and softened around them, wrapping the apartment in a quiet cocoon. And yet, neither made any move to break the stillness. It was as if both understood that this moment, unplanned and delicate, was significant precisely because it existed in its own quiet, suspended time. When he finally rose to leave, Marianne felt a pang of unexpected disappointment. She hadn't realized how much she had leaned into the presence of another, how comforting even brief, professional attention could feel when delivered with such careful kindness. "Thank you again, Marianne," he said as he picked up his coat, placing the folder in her hands. "For letting me bring this to you." She nodded, her fingers brushing the papers. "Of course," she whispered. As the door closed behind him, Marianne remained in the living room, listening to the soft click of the lock. The apartment felt emptier, colder somehow, yet her mind buzzed with the weight of what had just passed. A short visit. A simple exchange. And yet, it had left her unsettled, awake, and profoundly aware of a new dimension to her connection with her mentor. She sank into the sofa, the folder resting on her lap. Her thoughts circled endlessly, the gentle attentiveness, the subtle recognition, the unexpected personal resonance of a professional act. It was a night that would linger, and she sensed that tomorrow, and perhaps every day after, nothing would feel quite as simple or ordinary as it once had. Morning arrived slowly, filtered through the curtains with a soft golden light that painted Marianne's apartment in muted warmth. She had barely slept, turning over the events of the night repeatedly, feeling the weight of their quiet intimacy press gently against her chest. The folder still rested on the sofa beside her, untouched, a tangible reminder of the unexpected visit that had shifted the tone of her thoughts. She dressed carefully, deliberately slow, as if moving too quickly might dissolve the memory of the night. Every step toward the office felt heavier than usual, her mind wrapped around the image of Mr. Ellison's calm eyes, the reassuring patience in his voice. What had been a brief professional exchange now felt layered with unspoken awareness, a subtle acknowledgement neither of them had named but both seemed to recognize. The streets were already alive with early commuters, the usual morning rhythm carrying its familiar weight. Yet Marianne noticed details differently, the way the sunlight glinted off windows, the hurried footsteps of strangers, the distant hum of construction. Everything felt amplified, as if her senses had sharpened after the quiet vulnerability of the previous night. She arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to carve a small window of solitude before the day's demands swallowed her entirely. Her desk looked exactly as she had left it, yet the silence held a new gravity, as if the office itself had absorbed a fraction of the intimate tension from last night. Marianne opened the folder, scanning its contents briefly. Professional notes, minor corrections, nothing extraordinary, but her mind clung to the memories rather than the work. By mid-morning, Mr. Ellison appeared, as calm and composed as ever, carrying a stack of papers and an unassuming smile. Marianne's chest tightened as she caught sight of him. He nodded in greeting, his eyes briefly meeting hers, and for an instant, the entire office seemed to fade around them. "Good morning, Marianne," he said. "I hope the folder reached you without trouble." She nodded, her words slow and deliberate. "Yes, thank you. It was helpful." He gave a slight nod, his expression neutral yet subtly attentive. It was remarkable how small gestures like the tilt of his head, the patience in his voice, held weight after their shared night. Marianne wondered if he felt the same lingering resonance, or if it was merely her own awareness magnifying a simple act of professional courtesy. Throughout the morning, Marianne found herself hyper-aware of every interaction, every glance. She could hear herself analyzing his voice, his expressions, even the casual placement of his hands. There was nothing overt, nothing inappropriate, but there was a delicate tension, an almost imperceptible thread that tied her attention to him more tightly than usual. She took a brief break and stepped into the small office kitchen, pouring herself a cup of coffee. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint clatter of mugs felt oddly comforting. She imagined him in the office at the same moment, organizing papers, moving with careful precision, unaware that she replayed every detail of last night in her mind. When she returned to her desk, he was nearby, reviewing documents with another colleague. Yet every so often, his gaze drifted toward her, careful, considered, as if measuring the subtle shifts in her demeanor. Marianne tried to focus on her own work, but her thoughts kept returning to the moment in her apartment, the unexpected closeness, the soft yet undeniable awareness of each other's presence. Lunch came and went, but Marianne barely noticed. She wandered briefly along the quiet city streets, sipping water, feeling the warmth of the day begin to press against the chill left over from the night. The ordinary rhythm of daily life clashed with the extraordinary attention she had experienced, leaving her unsettled yet quietly aware of a strange satisfaction. Back at the office, Mr. Ellison returned to her desk. He handed her a document with a calm, deliberate grace. "I thought you might want to review this before the team meeting," he said softly. Marianne felt her heartbeat skip in a familiar rhythm. She took the papers, their fingers brushing once more a fleeting, almost imperceptible touch, but enough to make her pause. "Thank you," she whispered, careful to keep her voice neutral. Yet inside, a quiet tremor of awareness lingered. It wasn't the work itself that mattered anymore, it was the attention, the subtle care, the quiet acknowledgement that had begun to define their interactions. The afternoon dragged on, yet Marianne's mind refused to settle. Every sound, every movement, seemed to echo with remnants of their midnight exchange. Even simple instructions, brief notes, and casual remarks carried a weight she hadn't noticed before. She felt acutely aware of him, acutely aware of herself, and acutely aware that something had shifted, something intangible, delicate, and profoundly human. As the day wound down, Marianne gathered her things, her hands lingering on the folder Mr. Ellison had returned. There was a hesitation in her steps, a quiet expectation she couldn't place. Perhaps tonight would bring another fragment of understanding, another subtle moment suspended in time. Or perhaps it would vanish, leaving only the memory and the quiet ache of what had passed. The office emptied, leaving only her and the soft hum of the lighting. Marianne glanced toward the door, half expecting him to appear once more, carrying that calm presence and gentle attentiveness. The thought both thrilled and unsettled her. Some nights, she realized, left marks that daylight could not erase. And tonight, perhaps, it was destined to be one of those nights. The office was nearly silent that evening, the kind of quiet that felt like a pause in the heartbeat of the world. Marianne stayed later than usual, compelled by the subtle pull of unfinished work, but mostly by the lingering thought of him. She wasn't sure why, exactly why a mentor's attention could weigh so heavily, why a professional exchange could feel layered with so much unspoken significance, but she couldn't shake it. The city outside glimmered under streetlights, windows reflecting tiny shards of the night. Marianne leaned against her desk, stretching her arms, feeling both tired and strangely alive. The folder he had returned days ago sat neatly beside her keyboard. She thought about the careful, deliberate way he had handed it to her, the way his presence had seemed to fill the room without dominating it. It had become a rhythm she found comforting, an unexpected tether to someone she respected deeply. Footsteps echoed softly in the corridor, deliberate yet unassuming. Marianne's heart caught, not with alarm, but with a quiet anticipation. The door opened, and he stepped in, hands tucked casually into the pockets of his coat. There was no urgency in his movements, only that calm presence she had come to recognize, the subtle attentiveness that had unsettled and soothed her all at once. "Still here?" he asked, a small smile touching his lips. The tone was neutral, professional, yet it carried the same warmth that had lingered in their previous encounters. "Yes," she replied softly, feeling the weight of words heavier than usual. "Just finishing a few things." He nodded, glancing briefly at the documents on her desk before settling onto the edge of an empty chair nearby. It was a simple, ordinary gesture, but the intimacy of proximity lingered between them like a quiet thread. Marianne found herself unusually aware of it, the subtle shift in energy that came with two people sharing a small space in silence. "Marianne," he began, his voice careful, "I wanted to thank you again for your diligence these past few weeks. Your focus, your attention, it hasn't gone unnoticed." She felt a gentle warmth spread across her chest, not from flattery, but from the quiet recognition that her efforts were truly seen. "I appreciate that," she said, words steady, but her mind swimming with the complexity of their connection. He paused, as if weighing each word before continuing. "I also realized that our brief interactions, well, they've been more meaningful than I anticipated. I hope I haven't overstepped in any way." Marianne shook her head, smiling faintly. "You haven't. It's unexpected, but in a good way. I didn't realize how much a simple exchange could affect me." He returned her smile, small but genuine, and the air between them shifted, lighter, warmer, yet still filled with the weight of unspoken understanding. There was no rush, no urgency to define what this connection meant beyond its quiet significance. It was enough to simply acknowledge it, to recognize the subtle resonance of mutual respect and care. They spoke for a while longer, sharing insights on work and discussing small improvements, yet every exchange carried a deeper undercurrent of awareness. Marianne realized that professional mentorship could be more than instruction, it could be a space of recognition, of quiet trust, and of subtle, unspoken connection that left a lasting impression. As the night deepened, he finally rose to leave. Marianne walked him to the door, the corridor dimly lit, their footsteps soft against the polished floor. When he paused at the threshold, he looked at her with that calm, unwavering gaze. "Thank you, Marianne. For tonight, and for your continued dedication. It means more than I can say," he said. "And thank you," she replied, the words simple, yet carrying the weight of everything unspoken between them. He stepped out into the quiet hallway, and the door closed gently behind him. Marianne leaned against it for a moment, absorbing the lingering warmth of his presence. The office felt emptier, yes, but somehow fuller too, filled with the quiet echoes of connection, recognition, and the shared weight of unspoken understanding. She returned to her desk, finally finishing her tasks, yet the rhythm of her thoughts remained entwined with the night's moments. She realized that mentorship, guidance, and quiet attentiveness could leave impressions far deeper than she had imagined. It wasn't romance, nor dramatic revelation, it was human, profoundly human, and beautifully personal in its own quiet way. The city outside had begun to lighten with the first whispers of dawn, and Marianne stepped to the window, watching as the world shifted toward morning. She felt a serene clarity, a sense of calm that only comes from truly being seen, even in subtle, professional ways. She knew that the night, the brief moments, and the quiet exchanges would stay with her not as fleeting curiosity, but as enduring understanding. The soft glow of sunrise reflected across the empty streets, mirroring the gentle realization in her heart. Connections, no matter how understated, could transform ordinary days into moments she would carry forever. And with that, Marianne exhaled, allowing herself to feel the quiet peace that comes when unspoken understanding finally settles, leaving only the warmth of recognition and the promise of countless meaningful days ahead.